G'day, Michael from ironbarkgamesstudio, and welcome to the 5th video in this series, which will focus on creating some additional high poly meshes based off the body and prop meshes. Along with the head sculpt, these high poly meshes will be used for the texturing process. Creating high poly meshes is not a requirement for character development, but can greatly assist during texturing. Some details are easier to sculpt or create in high poly, while some details are easier to texture. Organic or complex pieces are typically easier to model or sculpt, while simple shapes are typically easier to texture. Jumping into Blender, the first thing we need to do is get organized. Soon we are going to have double the amount of meshes, so we need to create a couple of collections, one for the high poly meshes and one for the low poly meshes. Then we can duplicate the low poly meshes in preparation for adding additional details to them. So in my outliner, I'm going to add two new collections. One of them I'm going to call high, and the other one I'm going to call low. I'm going to place all of the meshes I've made so far in the low collection with the exception of the head sculpt. So the head sculpt I'm going to drag into high, and then all of these ones are going to go into low. I do have the head sculpt hidden as well as the helmet for now. I'm going to select all of the meshes in the low here with the exception of the helmet and the capsules. Because the capsules are linked to each other, I don't need all of them, I'm only going to need one. So backpack, belt body, the coat, containers, eyes. We don't actually really need the eyes unless we want to add some high poly detail to them, so I'll just leave those off. Don't need the head, we've already got our head sculpt there. We do need the helmet, the knee armor, and all these pieces of armor there. And I'm just going to Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel the move. It's important that the high poly meshes are in the exact same position as the low poly meshes, so make sure to don't move them. And I'll just left click and drag all this into the high collection there. Now the process comes of renaming all of these, so it is important to rename them. So I'm going to come through here, and for all the high poly meshes, I'm going to go underscore high, and then all of the low poly meshes, I'm going to type in underscore low. So I'll just time lapse me going through all of that. I'll also change the name of the head sculpt to head underscore high. This naming convention is going to be important when we get into our texturing process. We need to make sure that all of our meshes have the same name, but a different suffix. Okay, now for the capsule, I just need one of these. So currently, if I go into edit mode and just move them around, we can see that they're all still linked together. So I'm going to create a new linked version of this with Alt D and just move it out on the x-axis so we can test that it's still linked there. And this one's going to be our capsule underscore low. I'm going to duplicate this capsule here, and this can just be regularly duplicated. We don't need these links, so just Shift D for that one. Right click to cancel the movement. I'm going to put this into the high collection and rename this underscore high. This may have some rotation from where we duplicated it, so I can just go Alt R to reset the rotation there, and I'll also need to reset the rotation of the original low. Alt R, and now if we look in edit mode, it's all nice and straight. So the first thing we're going to do is bevel the edges of high poly meshes, in particular our hard surface objects. Hard surface objects tend to have obvious angled edges, however these edges are rarely sharp and tend to have some amount of smoothness or bevel to them. We can assign a bevel modifier on our high poly meshes, and this bevel can be baked onto the low poly mesh. The bevel modifier is great as it is non-destructive, meaning we can turn it on or off or change the settings after adding it to the mesh. So let's just hide all of the low poly meshes so they don't get in the way there. So we can just disable them all. So now we know that we're only working with the high poly meshes here. I'm going to start off with the backpack. So I'll select that, and I'm going to go into edit mode. Let's press 2 so that we can select the edges. And essentially we want to bevel all of the edges which we've already marked as sharp. So if I select one of the marked sharp edges here, I can go up to select similar, and we can go sharpness. Once I click that, all of the marked sharp edges are now selected. I'm then going to open up the item menu with N on the keyboard, and we should have a mean bevel weight under edges data here. So currently it's at 0. I'm going to slide this all the way up to 1, and that's going to change our light blue edges to this dark blue color here. This hasn't actually changed anything just yet. We still need to add a modifier to it. So coming down to the modifier properties, and under add modifier, I'm going to choose bevel. In the bevel settings, we're going to change the limit method from angle, and we're going to choose weight. So currently it's just choosing angles of 30 degrees to bevel, whereas we want to specifically target the ones which we've marked. So we're going to change it to weight, and then under the shading, we're going to tick on hard and normals to make it look a bit nicer. And if we zoom in here, we can see that we've got these nice beveled edges. We can change the amount of beveling in the amount factor down here. So if you wanted to reduce how wide the bevels are, we can just come in here and change the values. Typically this is going to be quite a low number, so 0.001, and that'll just make them a little bit thinner, maybe 0.0015, something like that. Note that the size of the bevel will relate to the smallest edge length. So if you have very close together edges that are marked with weight, the largest bevel value will be quite small. So for example, with the backpack, the smallest edge length, which we've marked as sharp, is probably this one here. So how much bevel we can get is probably going to be restricted to the size of that edge. And the only way to change that is by making the edge longer or not marking it as sharp. So we're going to leave it there for the backpack. I don't really want to add any more sort of high poly detail to that. I think that's going to be fine. And now it's just a process of going around to each of the different armor pieces and adding that weight and then applying the bevel modifier. And that's looking pretty nice there. Now we've obviously increased the poly count, but that doesn't matter because this mesh isn't going to be used in our final character. This is just going to be used for the texturing, so we're going to essentially bake those bevels onto our texture when we get to it. Okay, so the next thing we can do to our high poly meshes is to start extruding or indenting details to them. The overall shape needs to be roughly the same or very similar to the low poly mesh, but details can be pulled out or pushed in. So I'm going to select the high poly capsule down here. I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to start creating some additional details to it. So let's add a cut in there, 2 cuts up the top, 2 down the bottom, and let's just scale these up, sort of on the Z axis. Let's extrude these out, so S. Shift Z, so we don't extrude on the Z, just the Y and X. And let's create this little indent in here. So I'm going to go I to inset and then just extrude that back. Now we do need to mark the edges as sharp here, so I'm just going to select all of the hard edges. And let's right click, mark sharp. Now we need to add our bevel, so increase the mean bevel weight to 1. Modifier, bevel, limit method, weight, shading, hard and normals, and let's just reduce the amount. And I did forget to select these inside edges here, so it's not looking quite as nice as we wanted to. So let's just grab these, mark them as sharp, increase the mean bevel weight, and let's just mess around with this value again. Something like that. So let's extrude some more details out of the high poly meshes. So maybe we'll go down to the boots now and we'll add some details here. I might even just isolate this so it's a bit easier to see. So / to isolate. I'm going to create an edge loop in here. And we can always use the knife tool to cut in some details. So K for the knife tool. And I'm just going to edge slide these. Make a bit more of a curved shape. The cleanliness of the geometry doesn't matter at all here. Again, we're not using this for our final mesh, this is just going to be for our texture baking. And we're going to extrude these ones inwards. Okay, something like that. I think I want another little detail around the top of the boot here. So let's inset that. And let's extrude these faces. I'm going to create this separation around the ankle of the boot here. So let's create a new edge loop there. And just scale that out like that. And I also want some kind of details on the webbing between the feet here. So I'm going to select these edges here. And I'm going to use the bevel tool, so Control B. And I just want a few bevels in here. Then I'm going to select the inside edge. Press O for proportional editing. G, then just going to mouse wheel down so I can see my tool here and pull it up on the Z. I might even grab these 3 center ones, pull them up like that. I want another little detail around where the ankle is, so I'm going to add a new cube to the scene. Shift A, add a cube. It's going to be quite big. We also need to turn off clipping on our mirror. I'm also going to turn off proportional editing. Scale this down, bring it out on the X, bring it up, and on the Y. Turn the clipping back on now. So your high poly meshes don't have to come from existing meshes, so you don't have to sort of like extrude them out of existing parts. You can just add completely new meshes to the model. I'm going to add a few lip cuts and then scale it in, sort of round it off on the back. Okay, I want some edge loops around this side now. I'm sort of going to curve off the front here. And I'm going to show you a little trick now to create a circle from a mesh. So say we want this little circle detail in here. Instead of having to manually do it, there is a tool for it. So I'm going to create an edge loop here. And I want this to be nice and straight. So I'm going to go SY0. And I need a few more cuts in here to actually get the shaping of a circle. So Control R, and we'll add 2 cuts in there. I'm now going to select these faces here. X and delete them. Also do it on the other side too. X faces. Now I'm going to select the outside edge loop here. So Alt left click to select the outside, or rather select the inside edge loop. And then the tool I'm going to use is the 2 sphere tool, and the shortcut for that is Shift Alt S, and then move the mouse, and that is going to form a nice circle shape. It's important that you do this on a flat plane to create a circle. If you've got an object selected in 3-dimension, it's going to create a sphere out of that object instead of a circle. Do the same on the other side, so Alt left click, select that edge loop, Shift Alt S, and then just slide the mouse to create a nice circle. I'm just going to hit F to fill in that face, select these edges here, hit F to fill in that face, select both of these faces here, and I'm just going to create some random little extrusions and details. So let's press I to inset, select that one, E to extrude, scale it on the X to bring it in, and maybe just round this off, so E, scale it on the X. And if we try to size it down, it's not going to sort of size these individually. So what we can do is we can set this to individual origins, so when we scale it, it's going to independently scale. We do need to switch this back when we start extruding again, so the shortcut is period, and we want to go back to medium point, E, scale on the X, change this to individual origins, scale it down, period, change this back to medium, maybe just scale this in like that. So now we need to shade this smooth and mark in our edges again. So right click, shade smooth. If we go select sharp edges, it's probably going to select a whole bunch of stuff we don't want. So it's going to be easier just to come in here manually and just select the edges we want sharp. We also want to mark these ones as sharp, and also around the top of the boot as well. Now we can see that when we've extruded out, it's copied the mark sharp and also the bevel weight as well, so we don't need to adjust anything there. But we do need to select one of our sharp edges, go select similar, sharpness, and then mean bevel weight, bring that all the way up to 1. And that should be looking pretty good. Pressing / to get out of our isolate mode. And from here we could add additional details to our armor if we wanted to, but let's leave that for now and work on the next part. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some high poly details for the cloth pieces here. And this is going to be easiest to do in sculpting, and there is a specific brush called the cloth brush, which will make creating folds and creases really easy in Blender. Pretty much any high poly detail can be sculpted onto a mesh. So if you think about our head sculpt, how we use the alphas to sculpt on details, things like that. And they don't have to be organic details either, they could be hard surface objects. So say if we wanted a bit of battle damage on the armor, we could sculpt in some scratches and dents in there. But for this tutorial, we're just going to stick with the cloth. So selecting the coat outer high, we're going to go into our sculpting. And let's just zoom in. So the first thing we need to do for our cloth is I'm going to apply the mirror modifier. It's going to look more natural if both sides are a little bit different to each other. So we'll go into our modifiers here and just apply the mirror. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another modifier called multi-resolution here. And I'm going to click subdivide until it's at level 4. I'm also going to change the level viewport to 4 as well. So what the multi-resolution modifier does is it allows us to sculpt non-destructively. So if you make a mistake at all when you're sculpting, you can simply just delete the modifier and start again. Or if you need additional geometry to sculpt with, you can increase the level by pressing the subdivide again, and you're not going to lose the work you've already done. So the brush that we're going to be using is this one here, so the cloth brush. And just as an example, I'm going to left click and drag, and you can see how that's affecting it there quite extremely. So already that is pretty cool. It's obviously way too much for what we want, so I'm just going to Control Z and undo that. And I'm going to change some of these brush settings. So F will change the radius like our other brushes, and Shift F will adjust the strength, again like all the other brushes. We can also come into the tool settings here and change some of the settings. There's deformation settings here. By default it's on drag, but there are some interesting ones which you can use to sort of affect the shaping of the cloth. The cloth mass you can increase, and that's going to make it harder to grab and drag the cloth around. And the other tip is if you come up here to the stroke, you can change the stroke method from space, and I'm going to change it to line. So with that, we're going to start trying to sculpt in some fabric folds and creases onto the mesh. So maybe just decrease the strength. And it's probably still even a little bit too strong. And if we go too far, we can always hold Shift to bring it back a little bit. Might just decrease the strength of the smooth brush and soften off some of these edges. Don't want it clipping through the body, so I can always grab the grab tool and just pull them out. Okay, let's come up here and sculpt the top part of the coat. Okay, once we're happy with that, we can now work on the other bit of the cloth here, which is a separate mesh. So let's get out of the sculpting. We'll select the coat inner part here, jump back into sculpting. We'll need to apply the mirror modifier, and then we're going to add our multi-resolution, subdivide it 4 times, and now we can start working on it. For whatever reason, that lost the level viewport, so I'm just going to turn it back onto 4 there. Okay, and that is the high poly mesh done. So if we turn on our head high as well, we can have a look at the sculpted head there. And this is looking good, so that's going to do it for now when it comes to creating our high poly meshes from our original low poly ones. Of course, you could spend more time adding additional details to the character, and this is often going to depend on the type of game you're wanting the character to be in. First-person games typically require a higher level of detail as the player camera is really close to the meshes, whereas third-person or top-down games, generally they're going to have less detail as the camera is further away and the detail is going to be lost anyway, so when you're really far zoomed out, you're really not going to see a lot of that detail. In the next tutorial, we will be UV mapping the low poly mesh of the character. UV mapping is the process of unfolding the 3D mesh onto a 2D plane, and that's so we can get our textures mapped onto the mesh. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you found it useful. You can check out our Patreon link in the description for a variety of rewards such as starting files, tutorial notes, and early access to the rest of the series. And I'll see you in the next one.